Welcome to everyone. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for everyone who joined us on Monday when we had Minister Mary Ang come and talk to us about government's priorities and reliefs. I would say we are still waiting for that next iteration of the CBO loan, that $40,000 line of credit, the details on that to be released. So I do know that the staff at the Ministry of Finance are both tearing their hair out and working around the clock to get it launched. But the anxiety is significant, especially for the pre-revenue startups that are thinking that that's going to be a lifeline for them. So we're pushing daily on that, and we are promised it will come soon. Moving away from government programs for a moment, though, I think what we're all transitioning through right now is sort of we're transitioning away from a relief mindset, from a sort of emergency reaction mindset, and we're transitioning to, okay, we have to focus on recovery in a safe and sustainable way, and we're going to have to do it in a new normal that we're not sure exactly how long this is going to go on for. And so what we're going to start to do with these calls is make sure that we're equipping you with the skills that will enable you to be resilient in this new normal for however long it goes on. And so we've got a number of ideas of different speakers that we can bring to help build your resilience, both your skills and your mental resilience. So you'll see more on that in the next little while. One of the things that we know is key when we're working in a remote environment, and I know Sheila Bowman told me not to say that, so working in a distributed environment where we are not all in the same place, is communications. So communications becomes more important, or whether it's communications with your customers, with your team, with your community, with your investors perhaps, and of course, sometimes with media. So I really wanted to bring Kathleen on board to just talk about some of those issues. She's really experienced, and she's really got a ton of common sense, and I listen to her all the time. Kathleen is the managing director of Switchboard, which is a team of consultants with expertise in communication strategy, crisis management, copywriting, media relations, even event management. They're a longstanding member of BC Tech and the Canadian Public Relations Society. And Kathleen's going to talk to us about how to handle media, how to handle stakeholder relations, and best practices in communications, especially during times of uncertainty and anxiety. So Kathleen, over to you. Give us a few minutes overview, and then we'll move into the Q&A section. As always, ask your questions in chat or just raise your hand and I can ask them for you. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Great to see some familiar faces today. My team and I have been participating in these calls, I think, since mid-March when they started, and it's been a great way to get insight on what the community is feeling and also learn for us. I know some of the government relief I've found out from Jill on these calls, and we've applied for it ourselves at Switchboard, so it's been fantastic, a really great opportunity. Jill did a great introduction. I'll give you a bit of background on Switchboard. We're a full-service public relations firm. We're headquartered in Vancouver, Canada, proud to call BC home, and we have clients across North America. So we work with really a variety of clients, large multinationals like Amazon operations, nonprofits that are member-driven like the BC Tech Association and Digital Technology Supercluster, and also companies that are in a startup or a growth stage that we see a lot of. So Charitable Impact is a great example of that. Biba Ventures that went through the hypergrowth programming at BC Tech. So it's really a fantastic mix. And what we really do is we help our clients tell their stories. And what they're really telling is their why, their mission, what matters to a variety of key stakeholders. And Jill touched on a few of these in her intro, which was great. So your key stakeholders, when I say key stakeholders to you, that could be members of government if you were trying to receive funding. It could be members of the media. It could be your customers. And right now, as we're returning to this new normal, it could even be your employees and what you're doing to communicate with them. So I'm going to touch on a few points that we've seen through this pandemic and a few things that I think will prompt your public relations strategies overall. And then I'll turn it to you to ask me questions and really ask me anything about PR or anything about even managing our team during this time. So obviously we're in very different times. We're returning to the new normal and we're seeing a few things right now from a PR perspective. And what we're telling our clients and what we're hearing from them is really you've got to remain flexible and you've got to seize the opportunities that exist. So we had a great example of this where we had to bring a conference completely digital, which was really, really difficult. And it really was a stretch activity for our team, but we made it happen. It was supposed to take place in Winnipeg and it happened all online. And we actually found some opportunities to bring in our friends from the States, which was fantastic. So I'd encourage you to stay flexible in your PR and communications efforts. I think also you need to listen to your key stakeholders now more than ever before, and you really need to actively listen. Jill's a great example of this. She's hosting these town halls. She wants to hear from you. She's providing her email. You get a newsletter after these. You want to actively listen, and you want to have conversations with, not to. That's really important, and happy to chat through what that means a little bit later on. I think your messaging matter a lot more, and people are looking for more authenticity during this time. We've seen a lot of things happen in 2020. It's been a crazy time. Farhan and I did a webinar on this. He was the old editor of Daily Hive, and we've got that on our website as a resource. But what you're seeing is media narrative shifts so quickly, and we're seeing things like this pandemic take up a lot of the news. We're seeing Black Lives Matters, which is really important. So if you were using your PR plan or your ad campaign from early March, you just have to stop doing that. It's not going to work. What you're putting out on social media, and probably if you still flip through the channels, I like to do that when I'm watching the National. I like to still channel surf. Might be a little dated, but I still do that. And one thing you've noticed is the ads have all completely changed, right? Look at what people are wanting to do. I think Toyota has a great car ad right now. That's an example of that. The other thing is that the media newsrooms have changed. They are getting so many pitches every day. So you need to think through, is it appropriate to pitch? And I'd really encourage you all, some of you have some great Zoom backgrounds that I'm seeing, which is fantastic. Jill's is probably one of the best because she's got all of Veronica's art, but I'm seeing Serge, you've got a good one. Most people are looking professional today, so that's great. But really be ready. If media called you, could you take an interview at home? And there are some easy things you can do for that. You can have one of those ring lights that all our influencer friends use that you can easily order off Amazon. You could have a branded pop-up banner in the background. Lots of things you can think of. I'll get my colleague Nicole to drop a fun Huffington Post article that just profiles some of the MPs and their backgrounds and what we're seeing, and it just kind of does a deep dive in what your background means. Mine's a super plain background today because I'm in the office in a boardroom, so it's no fun, but you can definitely have some fun with your background and offer that as an opportunity. So those are kind of my key points that I would make. And I would really just encourage you to jump in questions in chat. Jill, I can turn it back to you and I'll be in the hot seat and we can have a good discussion about what returning to this new normal means and what we need to really be aware of for PR. So hit me with questions. I love lots of questions.
Okay. Again, encourage everybody in the audience, don't hesitate, just put your question in chat and we'll come to it, but I'll get us kicked off. Okay, Kathleen, tell us about the single biggest mistake that you see people do. It doesn't have to be me.
Yeah.
It's the biggest mistake I've made. But what's the single biggest mistake you see people do when they're maybe doing a media interview?
I think when you're doing a media interview, the biggest thing is a lot of people will tend to ramble on and you're not thinking in sound bites. So I would say that's something to think about. And your soundbite changes depending on the platform. If you're doing a phone interview, you can go a little bit longer. If you're doing radio, 30 to 45 seconds is an appropriate soundbite. For TV, really, I encourage you to think in under 30 seconds. And I think you're seeing that in the news right now when you're talking to doctors and professors and epidemiologists, all these folks, they like to be long-winded. We want to leave our key audience with one takeaway, right? So if that's on what they need to do, wear a mask right now. That might be the most important takeaway for Canadians. Make it simple and keep it simple.
That's great advice. Yeah, it's I always like to say, effective communication is in the ear of the listener, not the mouth of the speaker.
Yeah, that's you nailed it, Jill.
So, right, whether you've been effective or not is based on whether your target audience heard your message. So do what they need.
Absolutely.
Rather than what you want to do. Hello, Veronica. Would you like to come and say hello to the tech community?
Hey, Veronica.
See, everybody's waving. Excellent. And simply wing it if something unexpected happens. Okay, second question, Kathleen. Tell us a bit about social media, communications, do's and don'ts for social media. So less a media interview and more, your more general day-to-day brand presence.
Yeah, social media is a great way for everyone to stay connected with their key stakeholders that I mentioned, right? Whether that's your customers or government. I think what's really important with social media always is that you're responding in a timely manner. You can't wait to respond to people. I think also make sure you're tracking and that you've got strong analytics on it. You shouldn't be using the same message on every platform. Obviously, length is going to be different. I think if you can add videos, and I think the biggest thing that we're looking for in social media, and I think everyone's noticed this probably if they're scrolling through their own personal Instagrams, is people are a little bit sick of seeing the sourdough bread being baked during COVID. It's great that a lot of people baked sourdough, and you're super accomplished if you did it, because I definitely couldn't figure it out. But you've got to change and be putting really meaningful dialogue, and I think people are wanting that. It's definitely more authentic right now on social than I think it's ever been before.
Sorry, just proving I forget to unmute myself occasionally.
It happens.
So I totally agree with you. I think it's really important, like tone is really important, and getting the message and then the tone and then the media appropriate to the platform. Courtney's asking a fantastic question in the chat, and it's something that I think we genuinely are all struggling with. Mm-hmm. What is the best way to get our message heard with all the COVID news?
That's great. So I think what you have to do is think about what media looks for in a story. So I think if we're one of the first distilleries in Canada that created a shift to making hand sanitizer, you got some good news out of that because you were one of the first. But if you're, the 10th distillery or brewery that's making hand sanitizer, you're a little late to that party. That's fantastic. Put it on your social media, but not worthy to pitch. You need to think about who you're pitching, number one. Should you be looking at trade publications? Is this story going to matter? And how you're doing it. And I think right now, know that newsrooms are so inundated. A lot have created CBC, and we could dump the email in even for this. They've created a little note for an impact stories account for all the good human interest news around COVID. And that's what people are looking for. They're looking for human interest first of what are people doing for COVID? And the narratives are shifting. You're starting to see more discussions around, what would the second wave look like? You're starting to, what's the new normal going to look like? It's definitely shifted. And I would say just monitor those news narratives. Look through Twitter, look through Reddit, and be aware, because it's not always a good time to pitch your story. And if you've got a story with what we call legs and it's got some value, definitely look at it. On our resource page on our website, there's a great infographic that shows you what makes something newsworthy. And I would encourage you to look at that if you need a tool to get started.
I know that what I'm experiencing as a reader, as a viewer right now, is I do not need to hear more gloom and doom.
Totally.
Got it. My expectations are fully managed down. Okay. I am an optimist, but my feet are firmly planted on the ground. Do not tell me it could be worse than we're thinking it could be. That is not a helpful thing for me to hear right now. And that's just me as an audience, right? But I know that when I hear the voices that are telling it how it is, okay, so not, living in cuckoo land.
Yeah.
How it is, but giving some practical and positive steps you can take to feel more in control at this time, I really gravitate towards those voices, because that's what I need, right?
Yeah, and I think media, if you've got those positive stories and you can be that positive voice right now, we've seen so many negative headlines. And remember that a negative headline sells. That's what's going to get the clicks for the newspapers, and they all need to make money, and they're all cash strapped right now. So, if an airplane crashes, you hear that story a million times. If it lands, we never hear it. So even if you give them a really great story, I know some folks aren't always happy with their headline, and just know that sometimes they've got to be a bit clickbaity, and the negative ends up getting more clicks sometimes.
Well, it's a good point. It's the way the human brain is wired, right?
Yes.
So tell us about, is there anything specific to tech companies? Okay, so to the tech sector, or to something that tech companies struggle with, or common advice that you'd give to a tech company around communications?
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway would be using plain language. And what does plain language mean? It's jargon free. Not everyone knows what an M&A is. If you're dropping that term on a call, a merger and acquisition, not everyone knows all the terminology in clean tech. Or if you're in the biotech industry, not everyone knows what a therapeutic antibody treatment is. You really have to put that in plain language. When you read the newspaper, you're really reading at a 10-year-old level. Just think that's how they're writing the news. They've got to put it in digestible language. So I think what a lot of of tech companies are missing is telling their story with plain language and getting their why across really, really quickly. And I think it's because there's so many smart people that sometimes it gets overcomplicated.
Awesome. So we've got some great questions in the chat. I'm going to go back.
Awesome.
So from Innovate BC, hey, Kathleen, it's your number one fan. What BC tech companies do you think are doing a good job of communicating with their audiences during the pandemic?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I would say I think BC Tech's doing a good job. Obviously, a little biased as we're helping them out with it, but I think they've done a great job with the newsletters that they're doing. I think everyone's found the community calls fairly valuable, and that you get to activate the chat and you've got full access to Jill and their hello email and others. I think other tech companies that are doing a really great job in the space. Trying to think. I think there's a lot out there. Thrive, I think, is doing well. A lot of the ones that are still staying positive as they change their stories and narratives. I think we've seen big news from Accelera. I think it's just really exciting to be a BC tech company right now because there's a lot of energy and opportunity in what we're calling a pandemic. So I think we're seeing a lot of that. I think the other thing that you could look at when you're looking at good communications from PR companies is it, authentic, and is it in plain language? And I think all those folks are trying to do that as best they can.
Yeah. I think I might add in there, Kathleen, that one of the most charming things about the tech community to me is that they prefer not to toot their own trumpet too much.
Totally.
They prefer to get on with the work, actually.
I think they could do it. They could do it a little more if they wanted to. There's definitely, we could be a little less humble in BC, but that's our vibe.
So I often give tech companies the same advice I give women. Okay. It's not about you. It's about the mission. Okay. Yeah. If you care about the mission, if you're passionate about your company, if you really think you've got a world beating product, you owe it to yourself to tell your story in the best possible way, because that's how you'll achieve your purpose in the world. So if you make it less about you and more about the mission, it's usually a bit more.
Yeah. Get your mission and your why out there for sure. Nice question.
Fabulous question here. In regards to the Black Lives Matter movement and discussion on diversity, what is the best way to address this from a company perspective without, and I love this, Natalie, without sounding like you're doing it out of perceived obligation versus sounding genuine, and obviously without not addressing it at all? So what would be your advice?
Absolutely. I think we had a lot of requests coming in when the week was really busy with this. And I think the biggest thing was taking time, not just putting a reaction up. And I think that goes to communications right now. It needs to be more meaningful. You need to take the time and think about it. And do you have diversity and inclusion in your workplace? Do you need to have some conversations internally before you can even put out this messaging? And do you need to put something out for the sake of putting something out, or maybe just be quiet and have some of those thoughtful conversations? I think that that's been really important. And I think knowing where your own biases are and what can you do. I know on our team, we've done Indigenous cultural sensitivity training last summer as part of our Switchboard Day. We've looked at other training that you can do. I know I was talking to Joel Peterson the other day, and he's going through some training as he does a lot of recruiting in the space. So I think the biggest thing I would say is sometimes it's important to just pause. We don't need to live in this response instantly mode. And I think we're so used to that because of social media and a 24-minute news cycle and all of these things, but definitely pause and have some of those internal conversations. I think to make sure you do it in a meaningful and authentic way, you've got to have some different eyes on it. And if you can get eyes on it of someone who falls into the groups that you're speaking to, that's important. I know sometimes I read accessibility documents and I'm like, I can't read this anymore. Like I don't agree. It doesn't land. So I can be a good point of view on that. But I'm obviously a woman of white privilege, so I'm not going to be the greatest point of view on some of these things. And I think that that's what matters. So take your time and then, get a gut check and get some reality checks around it. I don't know, Jill, if there's anything that you would add there.
I do think it's important to say something.
Mm-hmm.
So I would emphasize that. But I think it's really important to shut up and pass the mic.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
If I come back to just practical stuff though, because we do have a couple of things that we're going to do at BC Tech. So we're embarked on our next What Works series, which is going to be very focused around purpose. So taking the diversity and inclusion work that we did in the last series and going a bit further. Tomorrow we have an Indigenous 101 seminar led by Corey Wilson. She's the leader at BCIT who leads their Indigenous Partnerships group, and she's fabulous. I've done this seminar with her before, and it's eye-opening and revealing. So I'd encourage people to maybe sign up for that. And then we're also working with Andrea Reimer, who's hopefully going to run an unconscious bias and a de-biasing strategy seminar for us. Then that may need to come in September rather than July. But we're working on doing both of those things as part of our work to, when we came up with the What Works series, the answer is in the title. I am not interested in problem description. I am not interested in roundtables. I am interested in identifying practical things that you can do that work so that we take the first useful step to make the change we want to see in the world, not talk about all the problems we see in the world. Really important that we start to see some action on this stuff. So thank you, Anne, for sharing the link for the Indigenous the Indigenous 101 seminar. That's awesome. Okay, so Kathleen, let's just close up with the sort of final question to you and an invitation to reflect, really. During this COVID time, there's been a lot of things that have surprised me. A few of them negative, most of them positive, but definitely some really surprising things. What has surprised you? What's intrigued and interested you about what we've seen from the reaction to COVID?
I think that's a great question, Jill. I think what surprised me, but I'm surprised that we've stayed so positive. I think that the tech sector, we've seen it as an opportunity. And I think there are a lot of people that, threw a pity party and it was a lot for them to do. And I think it just shows the resilience and the grit that you have to have when you're, in a startup phase or as an entrepreneur, and you can kind of see the positive opportunities. Not that it's been easy, but I think there's been a lot of positives that have come out of this. And I think there's been an opportunity for folks to feel more connected to their families and to find a little bit more balance. I know for myself, I like to just sit at the office and be in front of my computer. I have found more time to spend with my husband, which has been nice, and go on walks and do some of the things that I don't always make the time for. And it's made me more productive. So that was a bit of a surprise for me. So I'd say the positivity, and I think there's been some more connections. I get to see Veronica, which is always fun.
Just to be clear, Veronica really likes the new world, is hoping it never ends. No school, mom's home all day. What's not to like about this? So there are definitely some positives at this time. You see, she's got ambition.
She's ready to take her mission.
She might be one of the guests on the Q&A.
You never know. I'd attend that one for sure.
Okay, well, listen, thank you so much, Kathleen. That was awesome. You rock, and you always do, and we'll do more work with you in Switchboard in the fall to help equip the tech sector with the skills around communicating your message and your purpose well. So for us, next week, we've got a little bit of a pause in our regular service because we've got the Canada Day holiday in the middle of the week. So we will take a pause on our call. At least we may still send out our weekly newsletters, especially if there's news to communicate. So we'll work on that for next week. And then, as I mentioned, we'll be relaunching our Purpose series, our What Works education series. And so the first session there starts on the 8th of July, and it's going to run through July and then continue in September. So you'll be seeing some marketing materials on that. We'll get those out to you next week. And then the next speaker on our Q&A, so our next Q&A will be on, the 8th or the 9th of July. And it is Sean Bacon, who is ex-Canadian Forces. And he's going to talk to us about mental toughness and resilience, and what can we do to keep ourselves focused and mission oriented, but determined to succeed in our missions with resilience. So that's coming up soon, and we'll share the link with you to register for that. And I will look forward to seeing you on our next call. Thanks, everyone.